Knowing how to design tiered assignments is really fundamental to being able to differentiate your instruction. And the success of tiering is directly related to your ability to communicate clearly the need for differentiation, to manage small group work and independent work, and to identify and stick to clear objectives. If you take the time to create a classroom environment that accepts differentiation and to reflect on what you really want your students to know, understand, and be able to do, using tiered assignments should be a snap. Keep in mind that in order for our tiered assignments to be effective, we must know our students' strengths and weaknesses with regard to our objectives. This is where ongoing assessment comes in, and we must align each tier with our stated objectives. Finally, a closing activity or discussion gives us further evidence of what our students have learned and serves to build community in the classroom. While these requirements certainly seem logical, it's easy to forget to consider them as we plan and carry out our lessons. For instance, we often choose lessons that we know our students will enjoy that may have little to do with our objectives, or we find ourselves short on time and allow lessons to end without any real closure. But sticking to these requirements helps to ensure meaningful, cohesive lessons that provide both challenge and success for all students. The first step in designing tiered assignments, and really the first step in any instruction, whether you're differentiating or not, is to identify your objective or your objectives. What do you want your students to know, understand, or be able to do as a result of these assignments? Are these objectives important for students to master? In other words, are they ones that students can really put to use either now or sometime later? Or do they need to master these objectives in order to be successful with others later? Once you know what your goals are, it's time to assess your students' readiness levels with regard to those goals. As discussed in a previous video, assessment can take many forms and can occur at any point during a unit. Sometimes the best way to assess student understanding of a concept or a big idea is to discuss it with them either individually, in small groups, or with the whole class. Other times, it makes more sense to do a quick paper-pencil assessment. I've often seen teachers assess their students' knowledge and understanding using responses written on index cards during the last few minutes of class. It really doesn't matter how you do it. The important thing is to get a good idea of your students' current knowledge level and skills regarding a specific topic or concept so that you can respond appropriately to them. As you analyze your assessment, whether it be formal or informal, you're looking for students who seem to have a solid grasp of your objective, as well as for students who would benefit from more practice with it. After assessing your students, the fun really begins. Now you get to design or find an activity that focuses on your objective or your objectives. I say find because we often have suitable activities available to us in our textbooks and curriculum sets and in other teacher resources. There's little sense in creating everything from scratch. As with all good activities, the one you choose or design should be engaging to students, and it should be clearly related to your goals. This activity is the basis for your other tier or tiers, so you want to make it good. Next, you design additional tiers that address the same objective or objectives. So is the original activity the most difficult that you think your students can handle? Is it the easiest, or does it fall somewhere in between? What can you change about the activity to make it more challenging for those students who need more challenge? How can you create additional support for those students who might need that? How you answer questions such as these depends on the difficulty of your first activity. Most often teachers plan or find an activity that falls somewhere in the middle of what students are capable of, and then they add tiers both above and below that first activity. Planning the highest level activity first can help to ensure that our expectations are high for all students, and that's certainly a good thing. However you approach it is fine, but you want to make sure that each tier provides both challenge and success for students completing it. There's no rule as to how many tiers you need. That depends on your students' readiness levels and your objective. I think it's typical to think in terms of 3 tiers, high, middle, low, but I do think there are times when more are needed, or when having only 2 tiers is appropriate. Again, the goal is challenge and success for all. If that can be done with 2 tiers, that's great. And keep in mind that some activities may call for group work, while others may call for independent work. After you've created your different tiers, you assign students to the ones they'll be working on. So based on your assessment, which activities are most appropriate for which students? In terms of management, there are many ways to tell students which activities they'll be completing. Older students can be given task cards telling them about their assignments. Once these are passed out, the teacher should make herself available to answer questions that students have as they begin their work. It may be necessary to meet with groups doing particular activities before they begin their work. This is especially true in primary classrooms where passing out written instructions probably isn't going to be terribly effective. In this case, using anchor activities is a must. Remember that anchor activities are meaningful and engaging activities that students can work on independently. While you meet with one group to explain a tiered activity, the other groups work on anchor activities. This keeps the students on task and hopefully quietly engaged while they wait to hear about their tiered activities. Once you're finished with the first group, you send them off to work on their tiered assignment, and you ask a second group of students to come hear about its tiered assignment, and so forth until all students are working on their appropriate tiered. A good idea is to meet first with the group that you think will take the longest amount of time to complete its tiered assignment. That gets them started quickly.
Oh, okay. Is this the most practical?
Yeah.
Well, no.
It can be. One of the ways.
We're still checking. Okay. What's the surface area of this?
98.
How did you get it, Kelsey? How'd you get it?
We did the 2 link question.
Your task as students work on their tiered assignments is to move among the students, offering help as needed and asking questions to probe and further their thinking. And of course, you're also assessing them as you listen to them. We can certainly be flexible with tiered assignments. So it's possible to move students to other assignments if you notice that they're needing additional challenge or if a task is too challenging. Again, you're looking for that good mix of challenge and success, so flexibility is key. You can probably see how important it is to establish an accepting environment so that all this can work. As discussed in an earlier video, that takes time, but it's worth the effort. Differentiating math instruction based on readiness is a must because students' abilities to understand abstract principles and operations develop at different times. For example, any teacher who has ever tried to teach telling time knows that in every group of young children, some are ready to learn it, or may already even know it, and some seem as if they'll never quite get it, but they eventually do, just a little later. So based on experience, we can often predict when it's going to be very difficult to teach an objective to the whole group. Fractions pose great difficulty for some students, while others seem to master them with ease. One objective that comes up with older students is being able to add and subtract fractions that have both like and unlike denominators. Clearly, a student who struggles to add fractions with like denominators is probably not ready to add fractions with unlike denominators. He needs to know how to get to point B before he can successfully get to point C. A pre-assessment of student readiness levels with regard to fractions may simply be a post-test available at the end of a textbook chapter or unit. This test can be modified and used again at the actual end of the unit. After finding that students' grasps of fractions vary widely, which they often do, it's time to respond. So an appropriate starting point or beginning tier might be to add and subtract fractions that have like denominators. When students arrive at answers in improper fraction form, they change them into mixed numbers using a method of their choosing from ones they've already learned. Students in this group may use manipulatives if they need them. Those students who are ready for more challenge bring in their knowledge of factors and greatest common denominators, again, something that's already been taught. And they use that knowledge to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. They also need to change improper fractions into mixed numbers. Those students needing still greater challenge add and subtract mixed numbers with both like and unlike denominators. They also need to state their answers in mixed number form rather than as improper fractions. As the students work, and really they can do so either independently, in pairs, or in small groups, the teacher moves among them, checking answers and responding to questions, and of course to refocusing students as needed. Closure is critical, so when the students have come to stopping points with their assignments, the teacher brings the whole class together to discuss what they've done, what questions they still have, and to pose new questions that all the students can respond to. For example, when in life do we need to be able to add and subtract fractions? How is this skill useful? Or why is it a good idea to work with mixed numbers rather than improper fractions? This discussion should give the teacher an idea of where misunderstandings remain, and it gives the students a chance to share what they can do as well as what they understand about using fractions. Now it's time to try tiering on your own. Before the next discussion, select an objective or objectives to be tiered. Design a pre-assessment that addresses the objective or objectives. Analyze that pre-assessment. How'd your students do on it? And use what you learned to design tiered assignments. Make sure that your assignments truly focus on your objectives. This is more difficult than it seems. And finally, come up with a way to bring closure to the assignments for the whole group.